was, and then I had probably the biggest, I mean, as a commanding officer, what's the biggest thing you could have happen in your life? And that's to go in to take your squadron to combat. So Desert Storm came around, I got extended, which was a very big thing, and I stayed in the squadron and took it over to, we went in the Red Sea and went into Desert Storm. As we went over there, Desert Storm sounded like it was going to be a great air war because they had a lot of airplanes. So everybody was very, anxious, a lot of anxiety, but a lot of training. And we had just come off a big training cycle and didn't go through the normal 3-month, 4-month, 6-month build-up cycle. We just went right from air wing training at Fallon and went right to war. And so we were really prepped tactically. And we showed up on station and had, and then launched into the event, which is history now. The only problem with it was the big air war never happened. They all flew to Iran. And I was a strike leader, and I did a number of strikes, and I remember one in particular, one of the war stories, one war story I'll give you it was the third night. I was a strike leader, had a 34 plane package. We had 8 Tomcats doing fighter sweeps in front of the strike package, which was 8 A6s, then a number of F-18s were harm shooters, EA6s that were jamming, and E2s. And we launch off of there, and we go in, and we're targets just on the northwest side of Baghdad, a power plant and a rail yard. And the A6 is going to drop tons of Mark 84 1,000-pounders in there. And we launch, and all of a sudden that night there was a little bit of activity, airborne activity. So we're all hot to trot, and I actually get a radar lock, and there's a thing called PID, positive identification. So you had to have all sorts of off-board and on-board sensors to tell you it really was a bad guy, so you're not shooting at a bad guy. And as a strike leader that night before we launched, the last thing I said is I just looked at the air tasking order, the ATO, which showed where all the what coalition airplanes were going to be airborne at that point. And I went down the list, and there wasn't a single coalition fighter that had one afterburner. Everybody had 2 burners, 2 engines. And the night before, some 21s had been flying around. So I basically, as a last minute thing before we broke up, I said, last thing, if you see an airplane with a single burner, shoot first and ask questions later. So fast forward, in the strike, I'm going up and I'm sort of radar locked on trying to figure out if it is a bad guy. Everybody's saying it's a bandit, so we're trying to correlate everything. And then all my raw gear goes off, radar warning gear goes off, and I have get locked up, and you just had the sixth sense, and I couldn't tell what direction, but it was an SA-3 and missile, in fact, and I was turning right, and I looked right, and then I looked left, and I saw the glow coming out of the undercast. And you sort of seen movies of it and that kind of stuff, but it's weird looking. It's kind of greenish, glowish thing, but you could tell one thing. The bearing wasn't changing, and the range was decreasing very, very fast. And that was not a good thing. So, and I was about 27,000 feet, right at Mach 0.95, 0.98. And so wings were back. I was fairly loaded with airplanes. We had 6 missiles on and rails and everything and tanks. And so the missile came up, and we went full chaff and flares, did a big high G barrel roll. When I say high G, I'm talking 9 to 10 Gs over the top, which, by the way, I'll roll back to things you listen to. I remember that my whole career just talking about Gs is I remember in my father's house, the Grumman test pilot saying that Tomcat is a 13G airplane. The Navy said it was a 6.5, 7G airplane, but I always remember that 13 Gs, and I overstressed a lot of airplanes in my time, and I think I just all rolled it back to those test pilots, and it's a 13G airplane. But anyway, I did about a 9 to 10 G pull over the top, chaff and flares, and the missile missed and went behind me. There was a flash where it detonated, but in that process, the F-14, the airplane departed. It had a nasty characteristic of going out of control and into departure, and eventually spins at that Mach level, at that Mach number, with a rolling pull, high G pull, and with that loadout, in other words, have rails and missiles on the belly, where it had reduced the lift. So sure enough, just as the test pilot said, airplane goes divergent on me, and then I do for X amount of time, I'm doing all the pilot stuff. And process of that, I have an engine that stalls, I bring that back to idle, and I eventually shut that engine down. And in the process, because I was going super fast, roll down like this, and then go in this octaflugeron and pull out. I pulled out 11,000 feet over Baghdad on night number 3, and you saw this air-to-air stuff, flak coming up. Well, I was right on top of it. And it was like being on top of the fireworks, except there was a couple coming up and around here. It wasn't aimed fire, but I was in the middle of it. And the problem with that, I was at 250 knots, and the F-14 does not relight until you have 325 knots. So my choice was descend in mill power down into the stuff, or go to one burner, which I had briefed everybody. If you see one burner, shoot you down. So I go, boy, I'm never going to say that again. So I compromised and I tried one start low, and it was starting to be a hot start, so I shut it down again and then did another. And I went to min burner and went down a little bit and finally got it lit, and then got both burners on and climbed out of the gunk and went home and said, keep your mouth shut, Snort. You know, brief the brief and don't ad lib at the end. So, but that was the culmination. And right after that, right at the end of Desert Storm, I left my squadron and went back home.